Hi folks, in today's video I'm going to be talking about why so many games are about saving the world and maybe why you shouldn't do that. This is a trend I've noticed in a lot of homebrew games especially. I've been in games as a player where this has been the case. I've also kind of run a game where this was a little bit the case, where you are kind of very early on presented with a plot line that is saving the world. So before I get into kind of why I think you shouldn't, let's talk about why I think that we tend to build games that have these super high stakes with world-ending events. The first is that it's easy to make high stakes that your players and characters are going to be super invested in when they are literally saving the world. Like they clearly have a reason to be involved because they live in the world. They probably want to keep living in that world. And the next thing is exposure. Like, what are the stories that we are consuming, that you are consuming? And a lot of them do end up, whether they start out or build to saving the world, especially when you are looking at a lot of like fantasy, superhero, even some sci-fi, books, movies, video games. You know, it's building to that. So I think when you are getting a lot of exposure to world-saving stories, sometimes it can be kind of a false idea of like, oh, that's an element that is required to make it a good story. And also I think, you know, we like to feel like we've done something, like our characters have made a difference, that I've accomplished something in this adventure or in this session, and saving the world definitely can kind of fulfill this accomplishment feeling that you oftentimes want to have when you're sitting down at the gaming table. Okay, so why do I think that maybe we should steer away from some of these like world-saving storylines, especially at lower levels? I've been in some games, I've even run a game that maybe kind of fell into this, where at lower levels, you know, we were kind of tasked with things that felt way above our experience level at that point. So this is my issue with running a save the world story, especially like levels 1 through 5. Your adventurers are just starting out. They are learning their abilities. They are, you know, like novices at their field, essentially. And so as a player, when I've been in these games where I've been kind of tasked with saving the world or dealing with a war or something really big and impactful, both as a player and as a character, I usually at some point kind of am sitting there like, hi, excuse me, isn't there somebody more qualified for this? And that's not really a feeling that I enjoy having when I'm sitting down at the table. I want to feel like, you know, my character is supposed to be there. Now, that's not saying that I should feel like, yes, I'm going to accomplish everything that my character tries to do, but it should feel like there's that possibility there. The other thing is that oftentimes I think at these lower levels, it can feel like you're in a game where me as the player, it's not really going to matter what I decide to do, because the game master is just going to find a way for us to succeed. And that might not have been the case necessarily in all of the situations I've been in. And it may not be the case for you, but it can feel that way when you're given such a like disproportionately sized task to your abilities, and then you succeed anyhow. And I think also this is because oftentimes these kind of world-ending events, there's a lot more black and white to the success rather than degrees of success. So, if you are wanting to run something at a lower level, maybe figure out, well, what are the degrees of success? Or be prepared if your players don't succeed. What does that mean? Are you going to run a post-apocalyptic game? That could be really fun, but you probably want to plan for that possibility if that is something you are prepared to offer to your players. Or is it, hey, you didn't save the world and now the campaign's over. We're going to play something else. Which, people might not be as open to that if they are sitting down expecting to be in a year-long campaign and 2 months in, it ends. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't run high-stakes adventures at low levels. I think you just have to find what are high stakes for your characters, and that might be something that doesn't have like a global impact, but maybe has a smaller impact, or it does have a global impact, but maybe less of an impact on most folks, but it's going to be high stakes for the characters. If a single town gets destroyed, yeah, that's going to impact kind of the region and definitely those townsfolk. But people on the other side of the world might not necessarily be affected by it if you're trying to save one particular NPC. Well, the people who that NPC is like part of their lives, their family, their loved ones are definitely going to be impacted, but Bob on the other, continent, not a huge impact. So finding those ways to have these kind of high stakes, but more appropriately sized obstacles at these lower levels. And then that also gives you some place to build towards. If you are wanting to run a long-running adventure, if your players have saved the world at level 3 and then level 8 and then level 11, it starts to get less impactful and can feel a little draining for the players. Like, all we do is save the world. So by building up to it, you can provide a little bit more variety, and also kind of, it gives you some place to go. If you start at 11, you have no place to go. And honestly, for me, a lot of these kind of like lower overall stakes, but still high stakes for the player adventures are some of my favorite to play because it feels like something I can identify with a little bit more. Like, me, Dawn, is probably not ever going to be in a situation where my decisions are literally going to save the world. But I am often in situations where my decision is going to impact the people that I care about and my local community. So it's something that I think as a player, I can identify a little bit more with what my character's going through. And it kind of hits that catharsis thing that I enjoy having from time to time in game, as well as just the like feeling like I can identify with the accomplishments my characters have achieved. A special thanks to all of our patrons, especially Arvi. If you want to support our channel, you can head on over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. And honestly, I think if you do want to run a adventure or a campaign that is focused around stopping some kind of world-ending event or your character saving the world, start the campaign at a higher level if that is the kind of focus of the story that you want to be telling, and you don't want to have to build up to it quite as long. Like if you're sitting there going, okay, this is probably only a campaign we're going to run for 1 to 2 years just because I know people's life and moving or jobs or family is going to have some kind of impact on this. You can start them at level 15 or 18, whatever level it is that you want to start the campaign at. There's really nothing stopping you from doing that. And then you can use those monsters and villains that are those higher DCs and appropriately, matched to the player character's experience level. and not have to do some weird like paring it down or trying to make sense of a lower level monster having this much control. You can just do that. You can start it at a higher level, and then it makes sense. And it makes sense why your player characters are the ones kind of tasked with saving the world. They have the experience for it. And look, I'm guilty of this. The homebrew campaign that I ran a couple of years ago, my players were bringing magic back to the world. Like, what they were doing was having a huge impact on the world. Looking back on it, would I change how I ran that campaign? Yeah. I've learned things in the couple of years since I ran that campaign. Even the couple of years I was running that campaign, I learned stuff, and looking back on the first session from the last session, there were definitely things I was like, I would have done that differently. And one of that is kind of building up a little bit more to them actually figuring out what it was that was going on and that they were bringing magic back to the world. Now, I still think I would have had them contributing to bringing magic back to the world, but introduce the clear what they were doing a little bit later and make it make sense that they were making some small choices, making more personal choices rather than like world choices early on, and then find out that those choices had a bigger impact and start tasking them with the, are you going to do this or not? And I did, as I was building the campaign, have a contingency of, what if they decided not to bring magic back into the world? What if they stopped that from happening? How would I run things? So I did have a little bit of the like, if they don't succeed, what am I going to do? So that's something, something I learned. I'm guilty of this as well. But yeah. So how about you? Do you like running adventures where your characters are saving the world? How do you go about it where it feels appropriate, especially at lower levels? I'd love to hear that down in the comments below. Or do you just run high-level adventures so, you can have those epic encounters? And if you're interested in running kind of these high stakes, but on a smaller scale adventures, you might be interested in checking out our Let's Build a Town series. Our next video that should be coming out in the next week or two is about building the adventures based on this kind of small town that we're building. So they are going to be a lot of these high stakes for the characters or for the NPCs that your characters care about, but not necessarily world-changing adventures. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hey, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe because we make videos here every week all about tabletop RPGs and our other geeky interests. All right, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Hoo ha ha yeah.